Welcome back to our newest Mastering Mobile Marketing series, where we aim to make app marketing uncomplicated. Over the course of this series, we'll be taking you through the best tips, insights, and strategies to take your app marketing to the next level. So whether you're just about to launch your app or you're looking to go global, grab a coffee and listen up because we have something for you. So to kick off this series, we'll be talking with Yodel Mobile CEO Mick Rigby on how to make smart app marketing decisions. Mick, thank you so much for joining me today. So to start with, would you mind giving everyone an introduction to yourself and Yodel Mobile?
Yes, of course. It's a pleasure to be here, Sonia. Thank you. So my name's Mick Rigby. I am the founder and CEO of Yodel Mobile. I've been working in the app and mobile space for around about 14 years now. And it was my honor to be awarded the Outstanding Contribution to the App Industry Awards last year at the App Growth Awards, which would have been in Berlin. However, I'm recording this, we're still in lockdown from COVID.
Thank you for that, Mick. And obviously you've helped to launch and scale hundreds of apps over your career. Part of the reason you got the award. Are there any core learnings that you feel app businesses need to consider first and foremost?
Wow, so cool. There's probably about 1,000,001 things that need to be considered because it's an absolute minefield and a real challenge out there. But I guess for our viewers, there's probably three key things that sit above everything else, and the first is data. We're very privileged to be working in a space that is very trackable, that allows us to understand our users. So ensuring you've got the right kind of analytics in your app, and also you've got the right kind of attribution to allow you to understand where people are coming from and what they're doing, making sure they're integrated properly and you have the right data architecture in place. If you've got all of that, it'll give you the insight and learnings you need. By getting those kind of insights and learnings, it will allow you to plan both your product development roadmap, as well as, really importantly from our perspective, your marketing strategy. So data's number one. Secondly, I think focusing on retention is hugely important. I think a lot of businesses tend to focus on filling the top of the funnel, acquiring users. If you can't retain those users, then you don't have a business, because it means you're continually having to spend money to bring them into the app. So building a relationship with your users, putting in place a strong CRM program, understanding what they want and need is probably the second most important thing. And finally is getting the right team around you, whether that's your internal team or an external team that have done app marketing, app growth work before. They will have made mistakes. They will have had great learnings and understandings. Capitalizing on that kind of experience, I believe is really, really important, and it can help you, I guess, avoid some of the most obvious pitfalls.
That's great. All of those are really important. And following on from that, is there anything app businesses can do to make the most of the budget that they have?
Wow. Yes. Again, I think, first and foremostly is don't waste your money. Don't minimize that wastage. Now, it's easy for me to say, but being sensible, taking good advice as to how and where you should spend that finite amount of budget. Certainly if you're launching your app in the first instance, you probably don't have endlessly deep pockets. So don't be profligate. Just because you have the budget to do TV doesn't necessarily mean that you should be doing TV. What it does mean is that you need to be focusing on the lowest hanging fruit, invariably utilizing channels internally, your own channels where you can, the likes of the social media channels for paid user acquisition. They're all going to be really important in generating sort of those initial low cost acquisitions.
Right, and you touched on a point there, and you mentioned the differentiators between obviously companies that are looking to launch. And are there any factors that a business would need to consider that are different between app launch and app scale?
Yeah, very much so. I think app launch is really about learning, and don't get me wrong, scaling is also about learning. But from the onset, you need to be setting your benchmarks. You really need to be understanding the market. You really need to be analyzing that data. So get the initial stages of launching, consider growth input a good few months before you actually launch, getting the right data systems integrated, considering your app store optimization for launch, looking at low cost acquisition channels, focusing on where you can organic and the app stores themselves. They're all really sort of key for those first initial few months of an app's life. Excuse me. When you get onto scaling, it kind of changes, because your focus will be about not so much as making those initial learnings, but being able to grow as fast as you possibly can effectively. So the more you spend, the more you invest, the challenges you're going to face in terms of keeping your cost per acquisition down, because you've already mined some of those most effective channels. You need to be considering your organic and virality strategies very much from a scale perspective. If you can get 2 organics for 1 paid, you're onto a winner. So there's a lot of different focus when you have got through that first sort of 12 months, and you need to be changing your strategy accordingly to realign with that focus, and that focus is built on what your business objectives are.
That's great. I learn something new every time I speak to you, Mick.
Thank you so much.
Obviously,
So do I.
You've witnessed a lot of successes in your time. Are there any common app marketing mistakes you've seen, and do you have any tips that could possibly help prevent them?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. There are a myriad of mistakes that typically, some of those startup businesses face. I think one of the biggest is focusing on getting your lowest cost per install in those early days. Your lowest cost, sorry, there's a little fly there. Your lowest, sorry about that. Your lowest cost installs are not necessarily going to be the most effective. You need to be focusing on the lowest cost for a quality strong lifetime user. So getting the right focus, what we would call perhaps the North Star metric in place. What is the real objective of what you're trying to achieve, and not getting distracted by some of those peripheral measurements that perhaps would lead you down the wrong path. That is certainly one of the biggest mistakes I think a lot of businesses take. And also, I think relying on getting good advice from businesses and people that have done it before. I think I've mentioned it before, but avoiding some of those big pitfalls, and that can be very costly in the first instance, is something that I think a lot of entrepreneurs need to be aware of, because there's a tendency to really focus on what the product is, the app itself and what it does, and not necessarily on how you market the app. And you can get, if you're an entrepreneur and you're bringing an app to market for the first time, you can get completely lost in this. And the phrase is, you can't see the wood for the trees. So you need to maybe take a step back and really look at the big picture, and not just focus on the product.
And final question, I'm sure you could have guessed this one coming. Everyone's talking about iOS 14 at the minute. Do you have any advice for businesses on how they can prepare?
Yeah, I mean, iOS 14 is going to be it's going to be a step change for the app business. It's the first and most important thing is not to bury your head in the sand with it. It's going to come and it's going to happen, and when it does happen, it's going to change the way that businesses are able to track their users. There's going to be more requirement for, again, like I was talking about at the start, of building that relationship with your users. So, they do accept the fact that you're going to track them and tick the relevant boxes. So, that's going to be really important. Face up to the fact it's going to be happening. And also, I think one of the areas that I'm really interested in is seeing how the sector as a whole adapts to iOS 14 in terms of providing new ways of reaching your potential audiences, of potentially bringing them to the app. I think there's going to be a big need for quality creative messaging, how you position your messages to encourage people to visit the App Store and download you. So I think certain areas will take certain elements will take a more important part of the process than perhaps they've done previously. I'm intrigued to see how influencers maybe start adapting to the space. You know, we'll need to find other cost-effective ways of bringing users to the app ecosystem. You know, audio. You know, there's going to be a lot of talk over the next year or two, and lots of solutions that look at more audio-led marketing tools that will allow us to engage with individuals in a completely different environment. So utilizing them, hopefully, to bring more low-cost users to the app space is going to be key as well.
That's great. Thanks so much for joining me today, Mick, and for all those watching. Obviously, if you have any questions on today's discussion, we'll include a link below for you to get in contact with the Yodel Mobile Growth team. Additionally, if you enjoyed this video, please do like, comment, or subscribe to our channel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.